my baby. Get right back to What's up, everybody? This is Vivian Green, and you're listening to the podcast on WilLaVeist.com.
Thanks for tuning in to the Wil LaVeist Show, a science, tech, and pop culture mix. It's the Wil LaVeist Show. Begin at Hampton University. Frederick Douglass is going to be there speaking, and we got a chance to somehow get him here in studio at WHOV to talk to us about what he thinks about the election, what he thinks about the state of America right now. And Mr. Douglass, it's an honor to be here in your presence and to have you with us.
Good morning, fellow citizen. It's certainly an honor to be here on this medium, radio. I've had the opportunity to come back several times to the 21st century. Obviously, someone opened a book and transported me to this era. The radio in the late 1800s was a new invention, and so I was aware of what radio was. And as I come back to the 21st century, it's miraculous, not only this medium, but other mediums of communication, and as I understand it, social media that people are using. So I was certainly well aware of all the forms of technology, including the camera, which, of course, I was one of the most photographed men, African Americans, in the 18th century. And I used that effectively to create a positive image of the black man, counter to the propaganda that white society would portray us on billboards, in papers, and so forth.
You were certainly the most prominent African-American leader of your time, and you had the air of President Lincoln, during the Civil War.
That I did. I had visited President Lincoln several times. He called and particularly called and asked for my counsel in whether or not he would use black men to fight in the Civil War. And, of course, when I went, I said, certainly. And do you need help to recruit? Because the black man, this is our country, and we will fight. This will be our opportunity to show that we are willing to stand and fight, not just fetch water and supplies, but pick up arms and fight for the Union.
Many consider the United States to be extremely divided. What do you think? What parallels do you see? Well,
I do see some parallels. As a matter of fact, I made a trip back to this period not long ago and was assessing the situation. And the question I asked myself, is America entering its second antebellum? Because there are so many parallels from the standpoint of citizens arming themselves in a citizen militia. I understand in this day and time, since the 90s, the number of firearms being purchased by Americans has gone up by some 800%. The economic situation, where a few select people have all the revenue, all the money, which is mirroring the Gilded Age of the 17th and 18th century, as well as moral and religious concerns seething their way into politics. So those are three parallels there that the 21st century has with the antebellum that led up to the Civil War in the 1900s.
Why do you think this is happening? I mean, what is going on amongst the populace, amongst the people, that this is happening?
Well, one thing,
that's similar, and that's actually
sure. We certainly make gains. There's without struggle, no progress can be made. You may have heard one of those quotes, that quote from me before. In order to achieve progress, we must struggle. And I was fortunate to be listening in to your previous guests who used my favorite word 3 times: agitate, agitate, agitate. And so when we make gains, we should and we must continue to agitate. I've been often asked upon my return to the 20th century, Mr. Douglass, how far have we come? And what I say and what I assess in the situation now is that we've come from the sweet taste of freedom in our slavery to the bitter taste of slavery in our freedom. And that's because we have not continued to agitate. We should not have rested on our laurels. We've gone through, or you have seemed to have gone through, 8 years of being glad. And now we're looking at at least 4 years of being mad. And we should be doing more than just operating on emotion, but actually advocating for our rights and not only what the black man wants, but what the brown man wants in America.
You said advocating and for rights. We've gone through a process where the main issue that you fought against was the abolishment of slavery, right?
Yes.
And then we went through a period of gaining education access. You yourself, Booker T. Washington, Mary McLeod Bethune, Du Bois were very vital in that.
Yes.
The civil rights movement has taken us through putting an end to laws, finally getting to a laws where African Americans legally have full citizenship with the Voting Rights Act.
Sure.
Now we seem to be at what period? Martin Luther King started to steer us towards economic development and parity, but we seem to be stuck in not having obtained that. In fact, black wealth has actually gone down in perhaps in the past decade. What do you make of that? Is that what you think we should be focused on now? Is economic parity? Is that what you mean by rights and justice at this point?
Well, what I was saying in the 19th century is what I say now, and what the black man wants is full, complete, and unconditional enfranchisement in the political system, in the promise made by the Constitution. What I see and what I have heard in my understanding when I ask people from this era to explain what they understand about these laws, about the laws, the amendments to the Constitution that I carry around in my pocket.
Yes.
Here.
And I carry in my app, my phone.
That's very good. Normally, when I asked Americans what books do they read, they say the Bible. And when I asked about the Constitution, they don't have a copy of it on their person or in their home.
Yeah, I got both on my phone.
And so many of us have reduced our knowledge of the Constitution to urban legend. And so when someone speaks of your right to freedom of religion in the First Amendment, to voting rights, so forth and so on, the 14th Amendment, your understanding of your knowledge of that is what he said, she said, the book said.
They said, yeah.
And so we need to have a full understanding of that document and the laws, the ordinances that are meant to prevent us from exercising our liberties. This happened right after Reconstruction, that we made all great gains. African Americans voted into Congress, but soon the Dixiecrats rebounded, much as we see here on a local level. And many of those people from those politicians from the South ended up back in Congress to establish Jim Crow laws that some of them are tucked away in the books right now on your dockets.
You know, you mentioned what's happening now as we're tuned in to the Wil LaVeist Show talking with Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist who's come back and is going to be at Hampton University. He's so gracious to stop by and talk to us. Now, you mentioned sort of a return of the Dixiecrats and the parallels you see today. Many people have called Donald Trump, because of his rhetoric, have said that he's a racist. Now, you've known and lived at the time of Andrew Johnson and also President Andrew Jackson, who were known very much so to be
overt racism.
Overt racism. Yes. Do you think that, from what you've heard from Donald Trump, that he's a racist? Would you characterize him that way? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, what I have been privileged, and as we were saying before, I was a great reader in my time. I had about 5,000 books in my library. And when I come back to the 21st century, I try to use the technology that you all have to find out what is happening. And it's very easy to do because the public record is there. all the way back to 2007, 2006, leading up to the election of your new African-American president, the rise of the Tea Party, which parallels the Dixiecrats, to key pivotal moments in his presidency when racism and comments about his position about the president escalated unchecked when Joe Wilson yelled out,
"Yeah, you lie," and
you lie,
during his address to Congress,
which is
unprecedented.
Which is unprecedented in your time.
They didn't even say that to Lincoln, did they? Did someone yell out, "You lie" to Lincoln?
Oh, certainly they did. Once or twice, I didn't say it out loud, but I certainly felt that because he placated as well. He certainly, in order to get reelected, he said one thing here and another thing here when he was in the North. He was a man of practicality, and he governed that way. And his reasons for bringing in African Americans to fight for the cause of the Union were practical as much as it was philosophical or anything from the heart.
Do you see some parallels in President Obama's 8 years presidency, practicality, and especially since he would reference Lincoln often?
Yes, I certainly see parallels trying to be practical in the face of incredible opposition that the opposing party basically made a pledge that they would not agree to anything he did. And so still, in spite of that, still trying to reach out, trying to walk a fine line when he actually had the power to do more. And particularly when someone spoke out against not just him as a man, but the office of the presidency, what you're going to find is that when you start doing this under this presidency, there will be hammers coming down on those who speak negatively about the office.
Would you say that Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was an example of making a bold move that was practical to do more because it was
certainly a practical move, and many of us thought that it was a grand thing that we should actually start celebrating and end the abolition. And as a matter of fact, President Lincoln came to me and said, "Mr. Douglas, what do you think of my speech?" And I said to him, it was a fine effort. And when I went back to talk to the abolitionists and they were talking about what we should do following the Emancipation Proclamation, I said, we should continue to agitate. This is no time to rest on our laurels. Not only do African Americans not still completely enfranchised, women do not have the right to vote, and so there are many reasons for us to continue to agitate for the abolition and full enfranchisement of men and women.
Especially since he didn't exactly free all of the slaves, but particularly over in what is now Norfolk and Elizabeth City, they weren't.
That's right. And as I think you all might be celebrating now, Juneteenth down in Texas was not until some years later that those people even realized that they were free. And so after the Civil War was this big question that I continued to fight for, to go against the tide, that people would just take that victory, the victory of the Union, and continue to celebrate that as American history, rather than follow the narrative of the South, who wanted to romanticize their role. And I see upon my return to the 21st century that my failure to make that happen in the 19th century was one of my regrets, because today that romantic view that the South will rise again is still prevalent in society today.
Do you think that when President Obama made that breakthrough in 2008 and became the first black president, that there was also a certain level of celebrating that monumental achievement, and which led to the rebuilding of a backlash? Is that a parallel you see?
Absolutely a parallel. Absolutely a parallel. I was very fortunate several months ago to return to this period and visit the hallowed grounds in Rochester, New York, Seneca Falls, New York, where the Women's National Historical Park is. We were celebrating the birthday of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, one of the most staunchest abolitionists and women's suffragettes. And that was the Saturday after your election. And the mood was somber, to say the least. Of course, they were expecting jubilation, but with the election of Donald Trump, it was a pretty somber situation. And I was approached by a woman who basically was in tears. And she asked me, what should we do? And she wanted to know how far we had come and what did I think I had accomplished in my time. And I would be repeating myself to say that we never, in all the victories, the Emancipation Proclamation, we resisted the urge to celebrate, but to continue to agitate for the full, complete, and unconditional enfranchisement of the black man in American society.
So you say a lot of black leaders failed to continue to agitate during the
did.
Obama years.
As well as people.
Not that they had to agitate against him, but to continue to agitate against the system that has...
As well as people. One of the things that I hear most frequently here now is that the population, the demographics have changed thus that we have the numbers. But numbers mean nothing if you don't have people who are willing to be active and agitate. I was never on a plantation that had more overseers than they had slaves. The slaves always outnumbered the overseers. But would they agitate? That was the question. Even Harriet Tubman said, I freed 1,000 slaves, and I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves. And so we have to understand, although we may enjoy these great freedoms, that we are still not completely enfranchised in American society.
Well, Mr. Douglas, it's been an honor to have you, and I'm hearing from you. Your message to us is to continue to agitate until that full enfranchisement occurs, huh?
Yes. When you are told when to work, where to work, and for what to work, you might not be a slave of any individual in shackles, but you still might be a slave of society. And so you need to consider that what we aspire to is what's laid out in the preamble: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to do what we want to make sure that generations that we sire, our children and grandchildren, enjoy the promises of the Declaration.
Mr. Douglas, it's always an honor. We'll be back with more of the Wil LaVeist Show. Stay right there. Abolitionist Frederick Douglass was actually played by Nathan Richardson. Nathan Richardson is a poet, actor, and activist, and he captures Frederick Douglass completely, spiritually, physically, and it's great to have you back.
Thanks, Will. I tell you what, it's always a pleasure to be on your show. I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah.
What has it been like, doing Douglas, and how have people been reacting to you?
Wow, it's been life-changing for me. People tell me it's life-changing for them to have the opportunity to speak to Frederick Douglass, but it's certainly been a life-changing event for me. And I'm very grateful that the divine put me in a position that I prepared myself for the opportunity, because I was certainly reluctant to the opportunity when it presented itself. But then once I accepted the challenge, then I realized that I had actually been preparing for it. And so the knowledge of what Douglas stood for, and not only Douglas, but learning, you can't study Douglas without learning all the other people who were a part of the abolition movement, not only African Americans, but Caucasians as well. just a wealth of knowledge that
and it must
has to
be,
honored.
and as we were talking about, previously, it must be fascinating to know that history, see the parallels, see how we continue to repeat ourselves in so many ways. I mean, it's your take on that is just that's got to be crazy.
It's absolutely astonishing, and it's one of the reasons that I chose Douglas, because when I was looking at various other characters, certainly I felt like I could capture him physically because I already had the beard and complexion and so forth. But when I started reading Douglas and reading his speeches, number one, they were poetic language, which I'm a poet, so forth and so on. But they were pathetic in the fact that speeches such as "What to the Slave is the 4th of July," the Haiti speech, were still relevant, basically word for word in the 21st century. And that's when I said, I got to learn more about this.
And ultimately, it seems like they're still word for word relevant because we still have not effectively addressed this issue of racism.
Right. And so there's so many factors that prevent us from making that leap. Not only the fact that there's always going to be a counter to progress, and so what Mr. Douglas might have been saying to you earlier was that if we stop agitating, if we rest, then that gives the opposition a chance to come back and regain the ground that they lost. Contraband issue is relevant to this community with Fort Monroe right across the bay there. And
absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How relevant? Obviously, you feel history is relevant. How challenging is it in this new millennial era audience that you have when you're talking about young people? Mm-hmm. You're talking about issues that are so far removed, the 18th century, 1800s.
Right.
How challenging is it to make it relevant and to communicate it in the the current medium that we have?
Well, basically, it's we've been conditioned to receive, and I'm sure you're, and I listen to your show all the time. I listen to Another View all the time, and when the media is talking about how we receive our information and our news, we have really been conditioned to receive our news in only a particular fashion. And unless we can change the way we give that content to our next generation, then they're going to turn it off and they're not going to be receiving it well.
Hey, we're about to wrap up. Give them quickly your website, how people can get in contact with you as we get to ready. Yeah,
you can find out the Frederick Douglass schedule of appearances in 2017 by going to www.scpublishing.com. That's S as in spiritual, C as in concepts, publishing.com. Look forward to seeing you.
Hey, great. You've been listening to the Wil LaVeist podcast at WilLaVeist.com. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Go to my website and sign up for the e-blast to learn what I've got coming up next. And check out the website for where you can listen to the show live. Until next time, take care and God bless.